ages ago I did a video on a really awesome feature being added into the Pacman 6 beta, and that was going to be parallel downloads. Now, when I did that video, I didn't actually test out the feature, mainly because I was waiting for it to be properly fleshed out, and I didn't exactly want to run a beta package manager on my system. I mainly focused that video around tools like PowerPill, which is basically a wrapper around Pacman, which allows you to have parallel downloads through a tool called Aria 2. However, about a month ago, this feature actually was released with Pacman 6, and I sort of forgot to do a video about it. So, here's that video, I guess. So that we have a point of reference, let's install a package without actually having the feature enabled. And one program that has an absolute ton of dependencies is Pandoc. Now, normally I would have this installed, but I did go and uninstall it and clear my package cache. So let's actually go and install that now. So sudo pacman, and we'll do an SYU just so we can update our databases as well, and install Pandoc. And it's going to go and synchronize those one by one, and let's go and download the packages. And you've seen this tons and tons of times before. It's going to go and download everything one by one. It's going to download all 125 packages, and eventually it'll be done. I'm not going to go through all of this because you guys probably installed packages before, but you get the general idea of how it would normally work. Now, enabling this feature is actually going to be incredibly easy. If you've just installed Arch Linux with the latest ISO, you're already going to have Pacman 6 installed, and the config file that it comes with has the option we need to enable already in the config. We just need to uncomment it. If you're using an older install like I am, though, we'll just have to add a new line into the config. So what we need to do is go into our /etc directory, into our pacman.conf. This is where all of our Pacman configuration lives. And the line we need to uncomment or add is this one right here. Parallel downloads equals and then a number. Where this is placed in the config doesn't exactly matter. So I believe the default number for this is going to be 5. And that is basically how many downloads to do at the exact same time. And what you set this number to very much depends on what hardware and what your network actually looks like. The general safe rule for any threaded operations is match the number of threads on your CPU. So in my case, I have a 3600X, which is a 6-core, 12-thread CPU, so I should have this number set to 12. But you don't actually have to have it set exactly to that number. Going way too far above that number, let's say I went up to like 100 or 200 threads, definitely can lead to performance reduction, because every single extra thread you add is another thread that needs to be managed by your system. But you're never going to have a situation where the only threads running on your system are the threads for this application. If nothing else, if you have nothing else running in user space, there will always be some sort of drivers running in kernel space that are still eating up some of those CPU cycles. My suggestion is going to be set it to the number of threads on your CPU and then incrementally raise that until you're no longer seeing any performance gains, whether that's because you've, say, maxed out a CPU core and you've reached a CPU bottleneck, or maybe you're just splitting up your network connection so many times that doing that more isn't actually giving you any sort of benefit. All we need to do now is just save the config file, and then basically it's done. If it's not actually working, what you've probably done is misspelled parallel. I don't know if there's other people out there who are as bad at spelling as I am, but I occasionally forget how many L's are supposed to be in that word. So make sure you don't do that. Anyway, let's actually go and test out the feature. Off camera, I did go and uninstall Pandoc and clear my package cache. So let's actually see what happens now. So sudo pacman -syu, and we'll do Pandoc again. So the first thing you'll notice is it's actually going to synchronize all the mirrors at the exact same time. While that's cool and all, that's not where you're going to see the main performance gains. Let's actually go and install the package. So as you can see, all of this stuff is going at the exact same time. And because all of these are very, very small packages, we're getting a massive, massive performance gain here. Because trying to set up each of those downloads is going to have some sort of, I guess, what's the word for it? Some sort of setup time allocated to it. But in this case, we're doing all that setup at the exact same time, allowing us to start the downloads much, much quicker. While this isn't going to give you a massive performance gain when you're installing really big packages, let's say Firefox, Chromium, Kdenlive, if you already have all the dependencies installed, most programs aren't going to be like that, where you have one really big package and then a couple of little things. Most are going to be more like Pandoc, or when you're doing, say, a system update. Let's say there is 100 updates to install at the exact same time. Most of these packages are going to be these very small programs, whether it's, say, like an update to CP or an update to LS or an update to any of these little Haskell libraries. Most things you have installed on your system are only really a couple of meg, and that's where something like this really shines. You still only have one network connection, so shouldn't the downloads be considerably slower when you're downloading, let's say, 16 things at the exact same time? And yes, each individual download very well may be slower, but the total throughput is probably going to be higher. At my house, I have a 50 megabit connection, which is by no means a super fast connection in 2021. This would be basically, I think, 6-ish megabytes a second if I was using the entire connection on one singular download. But most of the time, when I'm downloading something, I'm only getting maybe at max about half of that. Am I being lied to then? Do I just not really have 50 megabit and it's closer to like 25 or so? Well, that might be the case, but networks aren't really that simple. Unless the server is like in your house, most of the time when you connect to a server, you're not making a direct connection to it. You're going to jump from router to router to router to router all around the world, and then eventually you'll get to the server, and then for that data to come back to you, it needs to make some other path, maybe the same one, maybe a different one, doesn't really matter, and then the data will eventually get back to you. Every single extra hop along that path is going to slow down the connection because each of those routers needs to do a little bit of processing on that packet to make sure it's being sent to the correct next location to make sure it ultimately gets to its destination. And if one of those routers happens to be, say, a router from 15 years ago and is actually really slow, well, the network connection is only going to be as fast as the slowest thing on the route. So if you're not going to make use of the entire connection anyway, is there any harm in splitting that connection up into multiple smaller connections and then sending them all out at the exact same time? The answer to that is absolutely not. And even if there isn't any sort of jam, there is another problem that needs to be considered as well, and that is the server you're actually sending that data to. Unless you've set up the Arch mirror yourself, you're probably not downloading from a personal mirror, in which case that mirror is probably there to serve thousands of other people in the community. And it wouldn't really be fair for that server to give the first person who connected, say, like, the entire server's bandwidth to themselves. What makes more sense is to split up that connection for each of the users who are trying to connect to it. So you're probably not going to be getting your entire network's connection straight to that server anyway, even if it is actually physically possible. Just to make it easy, let's say the mirror has a 1 megabit cap for each of its connections. So if you're only downloading one thing at a time, no matter how many extra things you need to download, you're still only going to be getting a total throughput of 1 megabit. But let's say instead you send 16 connections out at the exact same time. Well, now your total throughput is going to be 16 times what it is. I know that's a very simplified example of how that actually works, but I hope it does get the point across. And another thing you need to address is that you probably don't have your entire network's connection going to a single thing you're trying to download. Usually you're going to have some other network connections running on your network. Let's say you're trying to watch YouTube at the same time, or someone in your house is gaming, and if everything was allocated to this one connection, it wouldn't really be fair to the other users on the network. While each of the individual connections probably will be slower, this should hopefully lead to a much higher throughput. Now, there is a big caveat with everything I've said about network speeds, and that is, as long as your network connection isn't absolute garbage, if you have, like, I don't know, a dial-up connection, it's probably going to make it slower by doing this. But most people out there have at least like 5 or 10 megabit, and in that case, you are going to see some sort of benefit. The amount of benefit you see is very much going to depend on how fast your connection actually is. Last time I talked about the parallel downloads feature, someone said, wouldn't mirrors just throttle people who are making parallel connections to their mirror? While this could very well happen, I kind of doubt it because this is an official feature built into Pacman, but let's just assume that it did happen. That's why you would include multiple mirrors inside your mirror list, because if one of them is being slow, then it could just jump over to the next one. That's it for me, and before I go, I would like to thank my supporters. So a special thank you to Joachim, Donald, Logan, Michael, Andrew, Mitchell, Nathan, David, Carl, Will, Brennan, Chica Bento, Jamie, Joseph, Josh, Michael, Peter D, Stephen T, through Tony Tushar, and all my $2 supporters. If you'd like to go and support work, the links down below to my Patreon, subscribe, star, leave a pay, that sort of stuff. I've got my podcast, Tech Over Tea, available basically anywhere. I've got a gaming channel called Brodie Robertson Plays, where I'm live usually twice a week and upload usually about 5 YouTube shorts. Sometimes it changes, but that's the general gist. I'm also over on Odyssey. That's it for me, and I'm out.